Bonsoir, guten Abend, buonasera, and I'm not even going to try that in Swiss Romanche. I want to thank, of course, Madame la Directrice and the committee and all the responsible figures here who've allowed me to come today to the university. I also want to thank, of course, the adorable Dean Chapuis, who's become very quickly a very close and very dear friend, and the local league team for their energy and inspiration and for their kind invitation for me to be here. I love my species, but more about that later. I saw a movie recently, and at the end of the film, while the credits rolled, they had the central figure from this film, who was a character who'd led a life that had been actually compared to mine in some ways. They had him speaking while the credits rolled. And he posed a question based on aspects of this movie. He said, if your child, your son or daughter, was kidnapped and taken away by tremendously violent people, by terrorists, and you had no way to get your child back, but I knew a way, and I came to you and I said, I can get your child back for you, would it matter how I did it? This is the question posed by the film and posed by the person at the end of the film. The answer, of course, is that it does matter. The reason why we're all here is because it matters. And the fact that we have universities at all, the fact that these things exist, the fact that we have a culture is because it matters how we do things and why we do things. In the last few years, I've been putting my creative projects on the back burner, and I've been receiving thousands of emails from fans, which is great, saying, when is the next book coming out? For God's sake, get moving and get it finished. And I'm happy to say that book will come out this year. I'll be finishing it this year. I'm dedicating the year to doing it. But I keep pushing my creative projects onto the back burner because there are projects that are coming to me that are, I think, tremendously important projects. There are things like the elders, to work with a group of people who have sufficient moral authority, who have sufficient understanding of their lives and their experience of the world, who have sufficient knowledge, but who are also sufficiently divorced from their political careers, that they can provide us with some objective and dispassionate advice, some wisdom, based on their life experience. This is the elders. You can look this up, theelders.org. I was privileged to be involved in the foundation of the elders, to be involved with creating some of the preliminary documents for them. I've also been involved with the World Health Organization, their mental disability unit, which I think is tremendously important work. We're talking about vulnerable people here. There are no more vulnerable people anywhere than people who are suffering from mental disability and people who are the family members and loved ones of people with mental disabilities. And I've been privileged to work with them and with many other organizations, NGOs, and each time these things reach out to me, these groups and so on, I do this because it does matter what we do. What we do and how we do these things matters. The question is why? And when it comes to the question why, I mean, most of us, certainly I would say everyone here tonight, has an instinct that it matters what we do and that it's important for us to do good things, to try to do the right thing. The reality is that when it comes down to asking the question why, when we have to actually answer that guy who's posing a real-time scenario, your child is kidnapped, no one can help you but me, I can get the child back. Does it matter how I do it? Because the way I do that is that I'm going to go out there and kill people. And then I'm going to get your child back. Does it matter? You get your child back. Does it matter? Well, it does matter. And as soon as we get down to the real issues of this, it's a much harder question to answer. I've been lucky enough to be invited to work with various groups as well, businessmen, banks, corporations, and so on, which are trying to move in a better direction, which are searching for a moral compass, a way to find some kind of true north that says, instinctively, we want to work for a more equitable, a more sustainable, and a more productive world. That's what we want to do. And we're not sure how to do it. We know we want to do it. We know what we have been doing is not equitable, not sustainable, and is pretty destructive. So we want to change it, but we're not sure how. I've been lucky enough to be involved with them. It's kind of strange when you think about it. In my life, I've gone from robbing banks to being an advisor to a bank. It's kind of a stretch in one life. In a sense, it's always been logical because there was always within me, even when I was committing crimes, there was a moral compass in me. I knew what I was doing was wrong. I was desperate because I was addicted to drugs, and that addiction changes the way you think about yourself, your life, your family, your community, your society. It damages you and injures you and makes you vulnerable to a way of life that would have been inconceivable until you become a junkie or an alcoholic or some other person who's damaged by drugs. I was so conscious of what I was doing that I was probably, arguably, the most incompetent criminal in the history of crime. I was constantly apologizing while I was committing the armed robberies. I was constantly saying, I'm tremendously sorry to do this. It's a horribly offensive thing to do. Please don't be scared. I'm more scared than you are. And I was constantly saying to people, please stop giving me money. I only need enough money to buy drugs. I don't want to rob the whole bank. Just give me... And people would look at me and go, yeah, and still keep putting money on the counter and say, please stop giving me money. One time I robbed a bank and there was a front page photograph on the newspaper that had three women, three tellers from the bank, who were all smiling like this. And underneath it, the caption said, he was so polite, we don't mind if he comes back again. So I did. And when I went back, they saw me coming through the door and they said, hello, love, it's you again. And they started putting money on the counter. For the law students here, I mean, it's clear. I didn't rob that bank, they did. I didn't say a word. Okay. Please don't think that I think anything that I've done in my life, any of the harmful things I've done are funny and so on. Life is funny, situations are funny, but I know these harmful things that I've done because I live with them every single day of my life. When you sober up, when you wake up, when you face the consequences of what you've done, you live with it every day. You look at yourself in the mirror and you remember the harmful things you've done. You know them, you live with them, and you have to face them. You live with the shame, you live with the degradation of it. You live with the harm you've done to others and also to your own family. So please don't think that I take it lightly. I don't. I recognize what I've done, and I recognize the responsibility to be the sober person I am today. So that comes back to the question of why does it matter? I'm going to tell you why. Longitudinal studies of chimpanzees have shown that, and these are studies done over many, many decades, have shown that a set of characteristics we might call their negative characteristics are that they are territorial, competitive aggressive, hierarchical, and patriarchal. It sounds like another species, I know. We, of course, one of my favorite books begins with the line, I don't accept it entirely, but I love the line. It says, we are not descended from chimps. We are chimps. And it's kind of true. Our behavior, the negative behavior that we see on the front page of a newspaper, if you open any newspaper and you look at the negative stuff, that's us acting out our chimp nature. That's us being chimpanzees. That's us being territorial in wars. That's us being competitive aggressive in our companies and in violence and violent acts. That's us being patriarchal. That's us being hierarchical. Chimpanzees will spend more time and energy in a fight for a slightly higher place on the pecking order than they will in the search for food. So do we. the food is about getting a better place on the pecking order, or looking as though we do by having the right car and the right this and the right that. That's what it's about. And we're acting out our chimp nature. But fortunately, we also have another nature that's unique to us. We have a nature that's our human nature. And there's no analog for that anywhere in the animal world. Our human nature is uniquely ours. We're patriarchal creatures. Yes, look everywhere you look, you'll see patriarchies. I saw a documentary recently that was about the extinction of all life on Earth. It was talking about the various weapons that are being held in storage containers all over the world. Chemical weapons, biochemical weapons, biological weapons, nuclear weapons, and the capacity to destroy all mammalian life on Earth. I saw this documentary and I was about 40 minutes into it, and then I realized not one woman had been asked anything. There was all men from the beginning to the end. We live in a patriarchal world. Even when it comes to talking about the extinction of our species, nobody's going to ask a woman what she thinks. Certainly the documentary didn't. We are patriarchal, but we're also capable of creating an idea for which there's no analog in the animal world. It's called feminism. There's no feminist front of chimpanzees. It doesn't happen because they're chimpanzees. But we, even though we have a chimp nature and we're patriarchal creatures, we have a capacity through our human level consciousness. We have the capacity to override this animal nature and to express something that's unique to us. We're competitive, aggressive creatures. We're hierarchical creatures, territorial. Look at the hierarchies everywhere you go. People will create hierarchies even if you strip people down and put the same kind of uniform on them. People will find, with exactly the same, people will find a way to say, I'm kind of more in this uniform than you are. This happens. But we're also capable of creating an idea that's unique to us. It's called democracy. It's an idea that's so beautiful we will die for it. This idea is unique to us. There's no democratic front of chimpanzees. There's only us, human level consciousness, that creates this astoundingly beautiful idea. We are also territorial creatures. And everywhere you look, you see territorial demarcations. You go to a football match and I'm on the yellow side and I'm on the green side and there's a line in the middle and you can't mix them because you're a green guy and I'm a yellow guy. Whatever it is, we have nations, we have demarcations everywhere. People will draw a line in the sand wherever there is one. Even though the wind's going to blow it away, they'll draw another one tomorrow. But we're capable of creating an idea called the United Nations that says, you know what? We're territorial creatures. We live in nation states, countries. We have national identities. But we can get together and we can try to find a way to resolve our differences that's peaceful and productive and creative. There's no United Nations of chimpanzees. When chimpanzees run out of food in a given area, if their food resource is depleted, they will invade the territory of another troop of chimpanzees. If they're successful in killing and driving away the males, they will then kill all the infants and impregnate the females and dominate that food resource. That's the history of our civilization for the last 10,000 years. That is exactly what we have done for the last 10,000 years. Because we're chimps. But we're also capable of inventing an idea that's so beautiful, even we can't live up to it. It's called pacifism. It's an idea that says violence has to stop somewhere. I can't make you stop being violent, but I can make me stop. So no matter what you do to me, no matter how you provoke me, I will never raise my hand to you. I will never do that. That idea is so beautiful, almost nobody can live up to it. So these are manifestations of our human level consciousness. We have the capacity to override our animal nature. This is something that gives us a destiny. I'll come to that in a moment. It's linked with one other aspect that's unique to us, non-evolutionary knowledge. In a world where apples fall from trees, it's sufficient to know how to shake the tree to make them fall down, to get out of the way so it doesn't hit you on the head, or to pick one up and eat it. That's evolutionary knowledge. Chimpanzees have had it for millions of years. Monkeys have had it for tens of millions beyond that. We also have that knowledge. That's evolutionary knowledge. Shake the tree to get the apple off. Step out of the way if it's going to hit you on the head, or pick it up and eat it. But we also know something else. We know that the rate of acceleration of that apple is, we'll round it out to 10 meters per second per second. We know the inverse square law that deals with the ratio, the relationship between the masses of the objects, the two objects involved, and the square of the distance. We know these formulations. We know them to such an extent that we can actually send a vehicle from Earth to our sister planet Mars, land it on Mars, in exactly the place where we thought we were going to land it, where we wanted to land it, disembark a rover, send that object around, trundling around the surface of Mars, collecting data and more non-evolutionary knowledge, and send that back to us. Chimpanzees can't do that. We all know they can't, but it's important to say it because we tend to underestimate the capacity of this non-evolutionary knowledge. The fact that we have this non-evolutionary knowledge means that as it accumulates, we will learn more and more about the laws that govern the way this universe works, and more about ourselves and our relationship to the universe. The logical extension of that is that we will learn how to operate those laws in order to achieve changes in the universe itself. When you link non-evolutionary knowledge, unique to us, and the capacity to override our animal nature, unique to us, you have this thing called human destiny. If we had no capacity to override our animal nature, we'd just be chimps, and our destiny would be to be chimps. We might be smart chimps, we might be complicated chimps, but that's all we'd be. But because we can override our animal nature, we can act like chimps a lot of the time, like we do, but we can eventually override that until we become more and more fully human and express our human nature. If we didn't have non-evolutionary knowledge, it wouldn't matter how much we override our animal nature, because the knowledge itself would not allow us to understand how the universe works and then to operate those laws in order to bring about outcomes. When you put the two things together, non-evolutionary knowledge and our capacity to override our animal nature, you have a destiny. We have a destiny. I don't know what that destiny is. I don't know how it will look. But it's logical to conclude that at least in one part of it, if we get more and more and more knowledge about the universe, if we get more and more knowledge about ourselves and our capacity to override our animal nature, to stop being so competitive aggressive, so patriarchal, so hierarchical, to stop being so mean and vicious to each other, to start cooperating with each other. If we get there, if we reach that point, it's logical to assume that we would become creatures who preserve our biosphere rather than destroying it. So that in the first instance, if we achieve this destiny, we'll be preservers of our biosphere. We'll be creatures who restore the beauty and the integrity of the environment and integrate ourselves in that environment in sustainable, equitable, and productive ways. Beyond that, it's logical to assume that we would, if we clean up our act here and restore our planet to its beauty and to its fully functional biospheric beauty, if we do that and we have sufficient knowledge, that we would then move out into the universe, seeding life on dead planets, proliferating life, doing this everywhere, becoming gardeners of the universe. It's a destiny, it's one fragment of our destiny. Who knows what else will be? But the fact that we have a destiny is undeniable. The only two things that can stop us from achieving this destiny are ourselves if we release these biological weapons, if we release these chemical nuclear weapons, if we destroy all mammalian life, we might do that, and that's not impossible. Or if we're hit by an asteroid, and there's a massive asteroid impact that just wipes us out, that can happen too. And then, who knows, 25 million years from now, we'll be standing in this, there'll be people sitting in an arena like this, and they'll be thinking lizards, having the same discussion about how they can override their lizard nature. If we're not hit by an asteroid, if we don't destroy ourselves, the fact of our destiny is undeniable because we have non-evolutionary knowledge and because we have the capacity to override our animal nature. You put these two things together, we have a destiny. The question is, how do we achieve it? Destiny gives us meaning. The meaning of life, the meaning of our lives, there can be 100 meanings, but at least one. And people are constantly searching, but at least one is that we have a destiny. That gives us meaning. Everything we do will fit on a continuum between helping that destiny and hindering it, between enhancing the movement toward it and impeding it. These are the two extremes. So everything we do is going to fit on that continuum. So then if we have a sense of meaning, which is life has meaning because we have a destiny. If we had no destiny, well, it's pretty hard to find a meaning in all of this. But it isn't meaningless. It isn't, every other thing isn't equal to every other thing because we have a destiny. Now, because we have a destiny, we have a sense of purpose. Meaning and purpose in life. We have a destiny that gives it meaning. The purpose is to do what we can to help us get there. And everybody can contribute to that. Simply being nice is a way of contributing to us achieving our destiny. People ask, I'm dealing with business leaders all the time who are asking, how do we, if we accept that, yes, we have a destiny and we want to get there, how do we do it? The first step is to create an equitable, sustainable, and productive world. How do we do that? We do it with two main things. The first is using the set of positive characteristics. This is quite a lecture, isn't it? I'm sorry about this, but it's a short time and this is the only opportunity I got to get this information across to you. So, the first thing is there's a set of positive characteristics that's recognized all over the world. No matter where you go, there's a set of positive characteristics. People think that being compassionate is more positive than being cruel. People think that being generous is more positive than being greedy. People think that being fair is more positive than being unfair. People think all over the world that being just is more positive than being unjust. There's a set of positive characteristics, and it includes other things like freedom. That set of positive characteristics is not there by accident. It's there because that set of positive characteristics is concomitant with the achievement of our destiny. If we want to achieve our destiny, focus on the set of positive characteristics. Those positive characteristics have been condensed through a long study that I've been doing with a group of business leaders and other people, NGOs, religious leaders, all sorts of people, and we've looked at this for years and broken down the positive aspects of all the religions and all the positive philosophies, and we end up with 4 words that are called the 4 keys. Fair, honest, positive, and creative. If we ask ourselves, before we do anything, before we make any decision, is this thing fair, honest, positive, and creative? If we ask ourselves that, and it meets all 4 criteria, there's a good chance that it's going to be something that's going to help us to achieve our destiny and not something that's going to hold us back. Fair, honest, positive, and creative, FHPC. The second level, derived from this, is to look at the new paradigm and the old paradigm. For 10,000 years since the Neolithic Revolution, it's going back a ways, we have changed the paradigm through which we live. For 2 million years before that, and perhaps longer, we were hunter-gatherers. 10,000 to 15,000 years ago, we developed the capacity to domesticate animals and domesticate crops. When we could do that, we could create a surplus of food. When we had a surplus, we didn't need to follow the herds, the migrating herds, when winter came. We could store the food, we could cook it and eat it during the winter and survive. with our domesticated animals, our chickens and our sheep and our goats, and with our domesticated crops that made the flour and the other things that we use for cooking. When we first started to do this, as other bands of hunter-gatherers who were not yet domesticated could come along, maybe they'd lost their way, maybe they were following the herd too late, and they could smell the food cooking, they would come and ask for food. We would perhaps at the beginning give them some and share it with them. But after a while, we would look around and think, this resource is going to run out. So we can't keep sharing it, or we'll die too. We don't follow the herd anymore. We're in one place, so what are we going to do? So we would drive the people away to protect our food. The earliest human art shows people grouping together to throw spears at animals. After the Neolithic Revolution, the art shows people grouping together to throw spears at other people. That's the history of our civilization for 10,000 years. From the time of the Neolithic Revolution, since we first formed the first clans that expanded into clans of families, that expanded into tribes, that expanded into villages and towns and cities and empires, that's been the history of our civilization for 10,000 years. The two main characteristics of that civilization are compete and consume. That's the old paradigm. And it got us here, and there's all kinds of things that are pretty cool about where we are. But compete has brought us to the stage where we have sufficient means to destroy all mammalian life on the planet. Left competing with right, up competing with down, rich competing with poor, capitalists competing with communists, whatever. We now have a reserve of competition weapons capable of destroying every mammal on the planet. Competition has brought us to the brink of catastrophe. And consume, the other aspect of the last 10,000 years, compete, consume, has brought us to the brink of biosphere collapse. We see it every day. We all know. There's no need for any of us to argue about this. Everybody knows. That's the last 10,000 years. That's the Neolithic Revolution. That's where it's brought us. We are living in the most exciting time in the history of our species since that event, 10 to 15,000 years ago. In the last 10 to 15,000 years, that's been the paradigm. There's a new paradigm happening right now, and we are living in it. And that new paradigm is presenting a new way to think about things. And the new paradigm has two characteristics: cooperate, conserve. Those businesses, companies, unions, associations, NGOs, law students, those people who focus on cooperation and conservation, who cooperate and conserve, will be expressing the new paradigm. And sooner or later, everybody will. Any company that doesn't do that will go out of business in the future. As the old paradigm dies down, the new paradigm will take over, and companies will have to practice cooperate and conserve, or they'll go under. We have, when we look at this, a principle that comes from it, a useful tool. That principle is, for the last 10,000 years, the rule has been, the end justifies the means. I want to drive a car. I want to get from here to there. That's the end. So the means, well, I'm going to make an internal combustion engine and it's going to kill everybody on the planet. But that's justifiable. The end justifies the means. It doesn't really matter which way we choose to go around things. It doesn't matter what we do, because the end is the thing that's all important. That's how it's been for the last 10,000 years. That's the defining principle. The new paradigm has a different principle. The means justify the end. A company that cannot find a just, equitable, sustainable, and productive means to produce the things that it produces will not be allowed to make them in the future. The people who will make that happen, who will make it law, who will require companies to do it, are sitting in this theater today. The two most powerful groups in our society, the two groups that are doing the most to hold us back, to lock us into the old paradigm, it's the bad news, guys. Lawyers and journalists. The good news is the two groups that can do the most to help us move to the new paradigm are lawyers and journalists. We can't get there without lawyers. We're never going to get there. We're not going to reach that point unless the lawyers get on board and make it happen. The first secondhand smoking case was in 1976. The first one that's on record was in 1976. A courageous person sued an employer, a courageous woman, and a courageous female lawyer took on the case, and they won. Progressively from that point onwards, smoking has been banned in restaurants and bars and so forth. The last case that was won on aircraft was in 1998, when a man died in the plane from an asthma attack. He sued the airline, Olympic Airways. Olympic Airways was required to pay. And then all of the remaining airlines in the world, when they realized they had to pay, they all introduced a smoking ban. Today, the results of this smoking ban are already figures that can be tabulated. We can see already between 20 and 30% less children reporting to hospitals with asthma attacks. We can see between 20 and 30% less people reporting to hospitals with heart attacks. Excuse me? In such short time? In such a short time, we can reduce the number of people, the number of children who are going to hospital with potentially fatal asthma attacks, the number of people reporting with heart attacks. We can reduce it that quickly. By how? How did we do it? Lawyers took it on and fought the case. This is like the Innocence Project in the United States. The only way to change these laws is when lawyers take them on. When you do this, when you focus on our human destiny, when you decide that you're going to do a clinic, when you decide that you're going to, such as is happening here, when you decide that you're going to challenge a big corporation like a tobacco company, when you decide to do this, keep in your mind the positive picture. I know that very often we look at the newspaper and it seems that it's a very bleak picture. I know that everything seems to be very dark. Two things have given me perspective. The first is that I've been chained to a wall and tortured on 2 continents. I've been imprisoned on 3. I spent 2 years of my life in solitary confinement. I've been beaten, stabbed, starved, so many things that have happened. But I love my species, and I'm extremely positive, and I'm very optimistic about the future. And the second is that I'm old enough. I've lived long enough to see the change. Thank God. I never thought I would live this long. I've lived long enough to see the change in my own lifetime. When I was a kid, the advertising showed women as subservient domestic servants who served dinner for a lordly husband and a group of miserable children, and that was her lot in life. That's changed. We still got a long way to go. Obviously, we have a long way to go, but that's changed in my lifetime. When I was a kid, they used to show us documentaries on TV about trees being knocked down in the Amazon jungle, and they would say, "Progress comes to the Amazon." That's not progress, and we know that today. But when I was a kid, it was called progress. It's not progress. We know that now. That's happened in my lifetime. The Yasuni area in Ecuador has a reserve of oil underneath its pristine forest that's been estimated to be $7 billion worth. But what have the people in that region done? Instead of handing it over to Chevron or Shell or somebody else to destroy the forest and the people who live there, and all the rest of us, incidentally, instead of doing that, which they could do, it's the easy option, that's the old option, compete, consume. They've taken a new way, cooperate, conserve. They've put out a message to everybody saying, if you help us raise enough money, half of what we would get half of that 7 billion, we'll leave it in the ground forever. We'll never touch that oil, and we'll leave the forest. I'll put the link where you can donate to this group, to this organization, working through the UN. I'll send the link, I'll put it on Facebook and Twitter so people can get access to that. Don't you love the 21st century? I love this century so much. It's so much nicer and more fun than the last one. Anyway, this is a new paradigm way to do things, and it is the future. I had the privilege to work with Jochen Seitz, who's the CEO. He was the CEO of Puma. He's now the CSO, Chief Sustainability Officer for the PPR Group. He came to me and said, I want to redefine my company, and I want to make my company ethical, clean, green. How do we do it? I had worked with Richard Branson and with the Elders Group. He'd heard about that, and he said, I like the work you've been doing. I want you to work with me. So we worked together. We made the company fair, honest, positive, and creative. Fair, honest, positive, and creative. If it's not all four, don't do it. If it's not all four things, go back and think about it again. We started to do this. And at one point, someone close to him and close to me who developed this new model for the company said to him, you know, the big fight between Adidas and Puma, which has been going on for more than 60 years, this fight which has divided the town of Herzogenaurach in Germany between the Puma end of town and the Adidas end of town, which began with the two brothers, the Dassler brothers, Rudolf Dassler and Adolf Dassler, who fell out and who divided the town between them and created rival companies. This fight, which has meant that every shop has to be duplicated. There's the Puma bakery and the Adidas bakery, the Puma pharmacy and the Adidas pharmacy. And if you're working in the Puma factory, don't even think about going into the bakery that's the Adidas bakery. It's not going to happen. This person said to Jochen, you know what? This is not fair, honest, positive, and creative, and this is not cooperate and conserve. This is the wrong spirit. And he said, what do you want me to do? And she said, you've got to call this CEO of Adidas up, and you've got to say, we want to stop this fight between these two companies. We want to stop the war that has divided this town. So he said, I can't do that. He went away and thought about it, and after a day or two, he came back and he said, you're right. So he called up, kind of shaking, and the reception he got at the other end was tremendously warm. The two men were in tears. They were so happy to have broken down. The CEO of Adidas said, I could not be happier that you called me. Let's meet and talk about this. So they got together, they had a cup of coffee, and they decided what they would do is hold a football match, since they're both sporting companies, but with mixed teams. So it's not Puma against Adidas, it's people enjoying a game and who cares who wins. So a zero-sum game, a non-zero game. It was a non-zero that they'd chosen, which is part of the new paradigm. They played the game, and at the end of it, the people from the teams got together and then they said, bottom up, how are we going to make our two companies get on as friends? How are we going to do this? And the first step, the first suggestion was, let's get the research and development arm of each company to work together. If we've developed a new process that's more sustainable, that's better for the environment, that produces less pollution and less effects, let's share it so that you can get access to that too. And if you come up with a new way that is distributing goods or producing cotton with less water and so forth, then share that with us. So the research and development departments of both these two companies, which are still competing, they're still competing brands, but because they're still part of the old paradigm. But these two companies are working together, and they started at the level of research. It can be done. When the Heart for India Foundation went to India with the object in mind of raising the health and education standard of some of the poorest children in South India, they went into what many people have described as a needy gap. Here's this nest of NGOs, and people who have not had much experience with NGOs may think that everybody's hugging each other all the time. It's not really like that. There was a lot of rivalry, a lot of friction, a lot of competition. Heart for India went in with the mentality, cooperate, conserve. They sat down on the first day and had a stakeholders meeting with all the other groups that were involved and said, here's what we want to do, here's our resources, we're sharing them with everybody. How can we work together to conserve our resources to get the best possible effect for the maximum number of children. It turned out to be tremendously successful because they had orders of magnitude where they could save money and use those resources for the children. It turned out to be tremendously helpful because by cooperating with each other instead of competing, they could then have one single voice to go to government and to get help from the government, whether it's legislative help or whether it's financial help. Cooperate, conserve. When the Law Clinic decided that it was going to do its action, one of the first things that it did in the spirit of cooperate, conserve, was involve the police to say they're not the enemy. We want to make sure that vulnerable people know their rights and that their rights are protected. This is a given. But there's no reason why we should have a hostile or antagonistic relationship with the police. We should cooperate. And if we do that, we will have a better effect. They did it. They cooperated with the police got involved, and it's a much better result for everybody. They conserve their energies because when they meet vulnerable people, the idea is to select individual people who have a high aptitude and then to help those people to train others in their community so that this is something that's sustainable over the long term. Cooperate and conserve. We sometimes think that the picture is very bleak, as I said before. The long run of history shows that it's not. We are moving in the right direction. Of course, there's an enormous resistance. There always is. There's to every kind of change. But we have certain things on our side. We have the tide of history. 250 years ago, slavery was legal everywhere. 300 years ago. Now there isn't one country in the world that openly allows slavery. Of course, there are still conditions that can be described as slavery, but not one country on earth legalizes slavery. Not one. And only a few hundred years ago, every country did, and they did for 10,000 years. So that changed very, very quickly. Environmental consciousness has happened very fast. There are so many things that are changing and happening if you stand back far enough and look at the long run of history. Also, you have the most beautiful thing in the universe within you. The most beautiful thing that we can describe or look at, the most complex thing in the universe, is not something you can drive. It's not something that you can wear. It's not something you can live in. It is your human will. Your will is the most beautiful thing in the universe. It's the most complex thing, and that makes it the most beautiful thing. The way that your will works with your consciousness is more complex than the functioning inside a star. We know how a star works. We don't know everything there is to know about how your will and your consciousness interact. That is the most complex and beautiful thing in the universe, and it's inside you. You don't have to go anywhere to get that. That thing is that your human will is always and constantly connected to our human destiny by the fact of us being human beings. We are one. We look different, but we're not different. We are one. We feel the same things. If we lose a loved one, it doesn't matter if you lose the loved one on a battlefield, as has happened to me, and you have to bury that person with stones so that the animals, wild animals, don't tear the body apart, or whether you lose someone in a hospital and a machine just suddenly goes silent. The loss is the same. The feeling is the same because we are one human heart. When you fall in love, it doesn't matter whether you fall in love on the night before you go to a battle, as I once did in my life, or whether you fall in love on a train going to work. The feeling of falling in love is the same feeling because we are one human species with one human heart. I'm going to just leave you with this one last thought. Our consciousness is extremely complex, and we don't really understand where our consciousness has come from yet. There are many competing theories. I like some of the work of a neuroscientist named Raymond Tallis, who argues that in part, significant part, our consciousness comes from a feedback loop between our hands, the fully opposable thumb, and its capacity to hold, to feel the textures, and to send signals back to the brain in a constantly reinforcing loop of information, which constantly makes that capacity in the brain more sophisticated. And by the other digit, other than the thumb, the finger, which was used to point to food, to resources, perhaps an older or a more injured person, before we had language, could point to honey in a tree or to a piece of fruit or eggs in a nest. And a younger, more agile one would then go and get it and bring it down and share it. That is a communication that starts to expand our consciousness of who we are as a person. I am he or she who points. But there's something else, I think, that's tremendously important in that gesture of pointing. I think that our consciousness really began, our modern human consciousness, when one day one of our ancestors pointed to a sunset and just went, oh. And the others looked and went, oh. And that sense of awe, that's what it is to be a human being. Too much of what we have around us, I've lived in a world that has no awe, I can tell you. That's what a prison is. A prison, I spent 10 years of my life in prison. A prison is an environment that has been stripped of its awe. That sense of awe is what makes us who we are and what we are. It's the beauty and the magnificence of what we can be and of what we will be. And I hope each and every one of you holds that sense of awe and wonder within you. Thank you very, very much for your patience tonight. Thank you. Thank you.
Okay, so I started Shantaram and I haven't finished it yet. But I read the part where Prabhakar takes you to the kind of kids market, which at first I thought it was like some illegal after bar, some exciting scene going on in there. It turned out to be a place where kids were sold as slaves. And then you told the story of how these kids were taken from disaster-stricken zones and then moved on, and the families of those zones were grateful that one of their children would be able to survive. I'm studying right now a course of international relations which deals with migration. Specifically, right now I'm actually skipping the class to come listen to you. But what struck me was that in this course of international relations we speak of the IOM, you know, the International Organization of Migration, and all these kind of, like the UN a little bit, but less powerful, organizations that try to take people from disaster areas, or that should take people from disaster areas and bring them to safer areas where they can live and maybe even work and live for a while there. Well, I just found it interesting. This is just a comment, kind of. Would you say that there is in the black market a way of kind of solving these international relations and human rights issues?
No, not solving them. It's a good question because it's. I've actually worked in this area, which you'll probably find there's more about this in the novel Shantaram. It's not solving the problem for the problem. It's solving a problem for a person. We worked in the black market, for example, in Bombay, sending people who had come from Iran, who had been persecuted after the Iranian Revolution in '79, and then who had who'd survived that, but then who'd been forced into the war in Iraq, which cost millions of lives. And they'd managed to escape from there and make it to India. Tremendously arduous trip. And they were educated people who were trying desperately to be accepted by other countries, but countries wouldn't take them. The black market provided a way in. And so in an individual case, it can solve a problem for a person. It can get a person into another country and out of hardship or harm's way. But it doesn't solve the problem. And thus, the general solution to the problem is, in my view, number one, an end to hypocrisy. It's outrageous that our political leaders, I'm leaving Switzerland out of this because I love Switzerland, and I'm so honored to be here, and I love the country, and so I'm leaving Switzerland out of this. But, and I think it has a tremendously good human rights record when you look around the world. But let's look at some of the great powers of the world. And for them to entertain dictators and so forth, here's an example. Gaddafi was interrogating prisoners right up until the time that the people of Libya dragged him into the street and killed him. Right up until that time, he was interrogating prisoners for Western nations and getting information from them. That's hypocrisy. I mean, do we believe in democracy or not? Countries vote, they have democratic elections, they vote for a party that we don't like. Do we accept it and say, we believe in democracy, we don't like your choice, we don't really want to continue to trade with you because we don't like this government you've chosen, but you have the right to choose your own government. It's a democracy and your people are free. No, we undermine that decision. We refuse to recognize the government, and we help to bring that country down. There is so much hypocrisy that is creating so much of the problem. Iraq was a net exporter of people under the dictator Saddam Hussein, who was obviously, conspicuously insane, but he was also a friend of the West. Until the West didn't feel so friendly toward him anymore, he was a friend of the West. And under Saddam Hussein, Iraq was a net importer of people. I was working at the time in the 1980s in the Bombay Mafia, and we could not get enough false documents to help poor people get into Iraq because they could earn good wages there. It was a gigantic demand. It was importing, a net importer of people. People were coming in large numbers. Since our intervention, it's become a net exporter of people, and so on. This is happening all over the world. So the first thing is stop the hypocrisy. Be fair, honest, positive, and creative in what you do. Look to the set of positive characteristics: justice, freedom, honesty, compassion. Look at this set and express those sets. Stay true to the things that we claim to be true to the principles of democracy and freedom. Stay true to those things. So stop that hypocrisy. And the second is, we have to find a way to intervene. Intervention is either financially or militarily through blue helmets, never through NATO-led operations or unilateral operations, never. It's totally unacceptable. But if we have to intervene to stop killing, that people can find a way to do this. Unfortunately, this involves, it's a long answer to your question, it involves a reform of the UN. It's outrageous. I love the United Nations. I'm a passionate supporter of the UN. But it's outrageous that the UN has a Security Council which has 5 permanent members, and the 5 permanent members have a veto, and that those 5 permanent members account for 86% of all the weapons that are manufactured and sold on Earth. And these are the guys who have the right to say no when we try to introduce rules to restrict the weapons. And they go, I'm going to use my veto because I'm making weapons. You know, lawyers, it's very easy. I can teach you how to make money. It's great. Go and work for the tobacco industry, the alcohol industry, the pharmaceutical industry, and the weapons industries. You'll make a bundle. And once you've had experience there, go to Wall Street. The other way around. But is any of that fair, honest, positive, and creative? None of it. So, firstly, we have to stop the hypocrisy and stay true to the real values that we claim to hold. And secondly, we need to find mechanisms, financial, where we can, people will not leave their own country. They don't want to leave their country. They love their country. They don't want to leave. They leave because they're desperate. So find financial ways in order to help people to stay in their country. And secondly, if they're driven out by war, that are usually held proxy wars or held by some lunatic dictator find ways to stop it. It's simply unacceptable and outrageous that more than 70,000 people have died in Syria because they want to live free lives. And we have let that happen, and it's simply unacceptable and outrageous. And the flood of people, thank you, here's this group of people that you're talking about. Look at the numbers in every country surrounding Syria that's happened as a result of this. So that's my answer to that question.
Thank you.
Further questions? Okay, there are questions down here and up there.
Firstly, thank you very much for your lecture, because it was really great. And by the way, you sound like a very young and energetic man, actually. Yeah, that's true.
Just made my night. Thank you very much. I hope everybody heard that. You get it? Thank you.
I'd like to hear the question too.
The question that I'm very confused about is destiny. Sometimes when you look at all those people who are dying from famine, from starvation, or even young children, and there is lots of suffering in the world. And sometimes it comes to my mind that it even would be better if we die in one click. I mean, someone push the button and all this suffering stops. Because, it seems like future could not be so positive. And sometimes it comes to my mind that it would be only worth it, because there is no ending to sufferings, to starvation, and I don't see any positive perspective. And it seems like, how to say? It seems like nothing will change if the humanity will die, and maybe it would be even better.
Okay, so
Thank you.
Firstly, I don't think it'd be better if we all die. I certainly don't want to die right now. No, I take your point. There are a lot of people who believe that the world would be a better place if humans were not on it. And certainly an alien species that came to this planet and was far more advanced than we are, more humane. The more human we become, by the way, the more humane we'll become. That's the definition of being human. To be human means to be humane. To be animal means to be like a chimp, and we do that a lot. But to be human means to be humane. And the more human we become, the more humane we'll become, and vice versa. The more humane we are, the more truly human we'll be. If an alien came and looked at this planet, an alien would look at us as being basically a cancerous entity on this planet. We are destroying. The extinction rate is comparative with the end of the Cretaceous. We are destroying species at the same rate, roughly the same rate, as a gigantic asteroid impact. We're as catastrophic as that. We are polluting our rivers and our seas. We are cruel to one another and so forth. But firstly, the picture is not as bleak as it looks. I know it seems bleak and it looks that way, but if you stand back far enough and look at the movement of history, it's not that long ago that we were taking human beings and throwing them into an arena filled with wild animals and watching them get ripped to pieces for fun. We now have TV. We've changed a bit. We've come a long way from where we were. For thousands of years, we thought it was perfectly okay to invade another country, kill as many people as you could, enslave the men and women, bring them back, make the women into your concubines, and force the men to build your empire, because all empires throughout history were built by who? Slaves. All empires, every empire in human history was built by slaves. And it was perfectly okay, because look at the great stuff we got. Look, pyramids. Okay, it's fantastic. But slavery is inhumane, and now it's not legal anywhere. For 10,000 years we did it, and we thought it was perfectly okay to do it. It was a business. Now it's stopped. There's so many other things that we can look at where if we stand back and see the big picture of history, that we're actually moving in a better direction. You talk about sickness and famine. our life expectancy across the world was equal to the life expectancy in Afghanistan today, which is around 45 years. The life expectancy of an adult male in Afghanistan is 45. That's what our life expectancy was across the entire planet. Famines were endemic. Diseases were common, constant. We've managed to eradicate, through the World Health Organization, we've managed to eradicate a number of diseases. A tremendous achievement. It was impossible at any other time in human history. So the picture isn't as bleak as it seems. And we also have this new paradigm way of thinking that's getting stronger all the time. You can't kill an idea with a bullet. You can only kill an idea with a better idea. And the new paradigm is a better idea than the old paradigm. Cooperate and conserve with each other to restore the biosphere, to live in peace and harmony so that we live happy and fulfilled lives is a better idea than competing with each other constantly and consuming every damn thing we can find. That idea is not as good an idea. And the new idea, you can't kill that idea with a bullet. No matter how many times they bring out a militia, no matter how many times they try to stop this, they can't. It's a better idea, and in the long run, it's going to win. This idea is going to take over. We will. I have tremendous faith in my species, and I believe that we will. As more and more and more people feel this way, we'll reach a critical mass where we, a tipping point, a phase transition, where we as a species, in enormous numbers, think, you know what, this is just not right. It's not right that we make cars that when they hit pedestrians, kill pedestrians, when we have the technology to make cars that if they hit pedestrians, save pedestrians' lives. It's ridiculous that we have the technology and we don't use it because it's cheaper. Excuse me? What do you mean cheaper? The car that we're driving is killing people, and we have a technology that would not kill them. Why do we do it? Because it makes the car more affordable. Well, there's a time is coming when we're not going to accept that anymore. We're not going to accept that tens of thousands of people die on the roads, that tens of thousands of people die through addiction, that half the people in the prisons in the world are there for drug-related offenses, when all they're trying to do is change their consciousness. That's all they're trying to do, and yet we lock them up. It's ridiculous. 30 million Americans have been put into prison since the war on drugs began. 1 in 10. 1 in every 10 has been put in jail for what? For a policy that has been totally unproductive and totally destructive. A new way of thinking is coming. Leaders from across the world are already talking about the damage that this war on drugs has done, as an example. People are looking at the technologies we have, and they're no longer accepting that the end justifies the means. People are demanding a just means to achieve a just end. People are demanding this, and we're going to get there. I have every faith. All we have to do is that everyone here tonight has to do it. That's all. Then we'll get there.
There were 2 more questions, I think, in front as well.
Just here.
Sorry?
Yes, thank you so much for this interesting and here.
I don't know where
on the last, on the back.
Okay.
On the left. Here.
On the,
yes, thank you.
I thought it's somebody waving, so I thought it's got to be there. Okay.
I'm completely agree with what the nice lady said, by the way. But thank you so much for this entertainment and a nice speech. It seems to me, I read your book about a year ago, and it seems to me that you became a so-called better man, what you are today, since and due to the month, if not more, time that you spend up in India in somehow your new family. And they even adopted you as their son, and I believe that they give you this name. Can you just tell us in few words how they are, and if you still are in contact with them?
Okay. Sure. I think, by the way, that I've always had a capacity to be a better person in me, but I, as everyone does, I had to face the flaws in my character, to address them, to deal with them, to recognize the flaws in me as a person, as a human being, and then to realize it's like if you're a diabetic, you can't eat that sweet thing that you want to eat because it's going to harm you. And I had flaws in my character. If I'm this kind of person, there are certain things that I can't do because they're not going to be productive and creative. So I think I always had that in me, but it took time to learn about, you have to learn about yourself. The village in India was a great eye-opener because nobody could speak English. Only the guy who took me there, my guide. The people demanded that I learn their language because they're not going to learn mine, so that was fine. And they had not seen a foreigner for some 22 years before I got there. I was the first foreigner who'd been there in 22 years. The last guy, lucky for me, was a very nice Belgian guy, and everyone in the village loved him when he stayed with them for a month or so. And then 22 years later, I turn up, so they went, oh, great, another nice foreign guy. And I wasn't another nice foreign guy. I had escaped from prison. I had a chip on my shoulder. I was aggressive. I was hard. And I had the mentality, what are you looking at? What's your problem? And I was ready to fight anybody, anywhere. And I did, all the time. Then I came to this village. And the body language that we use in the Western world, the body language that men have, which is a language that tells other guys, don't mess with me, that body language which sends a very clear signal, it's like, just don't even think about it. Not gonna happen. Not gonna happen. And we know, we're guys, we all see it. And I see another guy doing that and I go, not thinking. And I walk past and somebody sees me and I'm in that mood, he's thinking, not thinking, he's gonna walk past me. In the village, they had no frame of reference because they didn't see foreigners. It's an extremely remote part. So they would look at everything I did as funny, no matter what. I could get menacing. I could do anything, and they would just fall around laughing. So after a while, all of that artificial, macho, masculine, don't mess with me, all that just faded away, because you don't need that. And it was all gone. And what was left was just me as a person. And I discovered who's me. I'm a guy who loves kids. And in that village, the kids, because you're the local freak, you're the unusual guy, so everybody comes. Anytime I went to the river, I had one child on each finger, so I had 10 kids. So everybody gets a finger to hold on to. I had 10 kids with me everywhere. You go into the cinema, which is a hall or out in the open, or usually once in every 2 months it's a hall. People go, you sit in a crowd on these little folding chairs, and you're watching a Bollywood movie in the middle of nowhere. And then with a projector showing the film, and then next thing someone bumps you, and it's a baby, and you say, it's a baby, and they go, haha, baby, and take the baby. And you go, okay. So you take the baby, and you keep the baby going for a while, then if the baby looks a bit restless, you look, and the next person says, haha, baby, and takes the baby. And you watch the movie, and then after a while, somebody bumps you, and the baby's coming back again. Then you look, and you go, oh, they're passing the babies up and down the line, so that nobody has to get freaked out and that mom and dad don't have to worry, because in the village, everybody's cool, everybody knows each other, and a baby belongs to everybody. It's a communal responsibility looking after that kid. You're not alone in having to do that. So I found that I loved having children around me. I loved the conversations of the kids and learning from them. They were great teachers. They taught me the name of every single thing, of a goat, of the river, of a tree, of food. Excuse me. I lived with those people in an environment where I was actually led from the bottom up, from the kids upward. I was in an environment where people never raised their voice in anger. I never heard one. I never heard a person shout. In the city, you hear it a lot. In India, like in every other country, never heard a voice raised in anger in that village. And here's a place where every person, it's only 300 people in the whole village, and at any one time, there's never more than about 150, 160. Every person in that village had heard the birth cry of every other person in that village. Every person in that village had seen that person take their first toddling steps, had seen them speak their first words and heard that. So they knew each other so intimately that they were tremendously comfortable. It was like one big family. And I loved it. And it allowed me to explore who I really am inside. When they gave me the name Shantaram, at first I felt horrified because the name means man of God's peace. And I wasn't. I was armed. I was ready to fight anybody. It was not I was escaped from prison with a price on my head. But after a while I realized that that experience in the village had shown me who I really am inside. And that I am a peaceful person. I do want to live in peace. And I do want to earn the respect of the people around me. It is tremendously important to be someone who is a man of honor and a man of integrity. It's a tremendously difficult thing to do, but that's why it's good. If it was easy, it wouldn't be. I hope that answers your question.
We'll take one last question.
Thank you very much. And thank you, by the way, Gregory, for speaking. This has been amazing, and thank you, University of Genève, for having us. But I kind of want to just do a little background on the question and then get to it. Both in the fields of business as well as in law, you said regarding the pacifism, you know, violence has to stop somewhere. I might not be able to make you stop, but I can make me stop. And that's an amazing message. And, you know, throughout history, there's been, you know, several leaders that have said that. With business and with law, there always seems to be an issue with this, though, because it's almost like two men ready to fight. You know, if I put my hands down, then I'm vulnerable to you attacking, so on and so forth. Same thing in business when two companies are competing. You know, who's going to give up that upper hand, that upper echelon on the pecking order? And even in law, sometimes we see it when it's difficult for a lawyer to step out of line because he's in front of a judge that's from old paradigm. And he has to go back to that courtroom, and he has to work in front of that person again. So how can the journalist and common people, or, you know, starting business people, help to kind of expedite that process and get people to kind of lay down their arms and work together and kind of just stop the violence on their own?
Really good question. And it's the same question that Richard Branson asked on the very first meeting we had when we talked with his business group. Same question that was posed. It's like, here I go into a meeting. I don't want to go out of that meeting as second dog. I want to go out of that meeting as top dog. I want to get my agenda, you know, recognized, realized. I want my business to go forward. I don't want someone else coming up with an advantage over me and so on, and then have to go back and tell the people in my company who depend on me for their living that I lost that meeting. Those two meetings they're usually not two men, they're two chimps, by the way, facing up to each other, beating their chests. And if you want to see that in action, go to a sporting game. There's a great piece of film that I saw once that has a supporter, Arsenal supporter, I don't know if that's important, but he's an Arsenal supporter who outraged at a decision being made by a referee, and he's going, and then they take a piece of footage of a chimpanzee in the jungle doing an aggression display at another chimp going, and they lay the two over each other, and they are identical, absolutely identical. So this is our chimp nature playing itself out, and it's going to take a long time before we are more human than chimp. At the moment, that's like 50-50, you know, we're chimps and we're humans. Everywhere you look, as I said, front page of the newspaper, all chimp. Competition, killing, maiming, you know, demarcation, territorialism, you know, patriarchy, hierarchy, front page, maybe the first 2, 3. Turn to the art section, all human. That's, you know, the symphony orchestra, that's human. There's no symphony of chimps. It doesn't happen. We are cooperating with one another as human beings through art. It's very often the way that it's done. Strangely enough, probably the way to understand that is that, in my view, one of the strangest and most powerful oxymoronic phrases in history is the art of war. It's just so ridiculous. It's like, excuse me, war is the opposite of art. And war is an expression of our animal nature. Art is an expression of our human nature. Okay, first step is to research the areas that are already ahead of the game. There are lots of places on the internet that you can find. There are lots of places out there, groups, NGOs, groups of lawyers. Like, for example, you're talking about lawyers, you've got the Innocence Project. You've got the Law Clinic. They're ahead of the game. Here are people saying, I could make a fortune in Wall Street. I want to go and help vulnerable people to understand their rights and then to protect their rights. You look at groups for instance, the WHO and so on. There are groups that are ahead of the game. The WHO was 40 years ahead in banning smoking. They were 40 years ahead of everybody else. They beat their argument was the best, which is the reason why the smoking industry singled out the WHO, or OMS here, that they singled them out as the biggest enemy of the tobacco companies in the world, was the World Health Organization. And they spent billions trying to destroy it and undermine it because they were 40 years ahead of the game. Find the groups that are ahead of the game and then slowly introduce into your environment an interaction with those groups. Bring them in. Let people know in your environment, you know what? Found this really great site. Amazing. The Dalai Lama likes it, so it must be good. Whatever the reason, that the hook that you use to get people in, so here's the site, here's something good. Bring people in. In other words, seek out those who are already ahead of the game. Secondly, create positive communication feedback loops. One of the driving forces in the universe, one of the things that makes the universe work, is a thing called an autopoietic system. The universe is an autopoietic system. And everything in it is. A human cell is an autopoietic system. The Milky Way galaxy is an autopoietic system. An autopoietic system is a self-reinforcing feedback loop. So a cell is that. And a cell has organelles, it has a membrane, it's recognizable over time. It has individual organelles that serve various functions. It takes in nutrient, transforms it into energy, and then expels waste. This is one of the foundation organizing principles upon which everything in the universe works, right? The computer formula for the universe is, if this, then that. That's the computer formula for how if there's a God, when God created the formula, he just wrote, here it is, if this, then that. If there are sufficient exotic particles in a sufficiently conducive environment, they will come together in space, time, and gravity to create complex particles. If there are, then that. If this, then that is the formula. And then once it happens, once it starts with this, you press the button, if this, then that. The next thing is that you have various things that make it work. One of them is autopoietic system. We can do that. We can take this principle from nature, from the entire universe, the way everything works, and we can build that into what we do. A positive communication feedback loop. It means bringing in positive data, introducing it to other people, and making it part of the discourse. So that the discourse itself, the communication, that means a CEO can introduce, as Jochen Seitz did at Puma, you can introduce a new idea into your company that is a positive idea that's going to meet with the resistance curve. There are going to be people saying, oh, but that's not the way we've done things. We've always done it like that. Why would we change? It's working okay. And so on. You're going to get a resistance curve, but when he brings the idea in and makes it part of the discourse, it starts a positive reinforcement communication loop. So start the communication. The next is surround yourself with positive people, people who also have the same point of view. There's plenty of resistance out there to new ideas and better ideas, and that resistance is very well organized. It has a lot of money, it has a lot of access to politicians, it has a lot more resources than we do. And we want the world to be a better place. We want it to be more equitable, we want it to be more sustainable and more productive instead of destructive. That's what we want. But there's a lot of people out there who have a vested interest in it being unfair, unsustainable, and destructive. And they're going to resist what we're doing. So surround yourself with positive people because you're going to need that. And the last thing of all is set up within yourself. You can use the ones I've given you, fair, honest, positive, creative, the set of positive characteristics, the new paradigm, cooperate, conserve. You can use the ones I've given you or use any that you find from a religion, from a philosophy, from anything that you find anywhere that helps you, and then refer back to that guideline all the time. Some people would say getting in touch with your higher power, great for them. I'm not sure how that works personally. For me, the higher power is the universe and our human will, and getting back in touch with that is tremendously important. Having a set of references that you can keep going back to, something that you think is unbreakable. For example, the United Nations Declaration on Human Rights. For me, I'm not denigrating any religion, but the most powerful document ever written is not a religious document. It's the United Nations Declaration on Human Rights. This is a document that says, for the first time in our history, these rights are born rights. They belong to everybody. And here's the set of them. It's not a perfect document. It's a document that was written in the 40s before there was even an understanding of the environment and the biosphere. It doesn't incorporate the biosphere. It's not a perfect document, but it's a wonderful document. Have a set of references in your own life, wherever they come from, that you can continually refer to, whether it's a higher power or whether it's a set of referential documents that help you to stay grounded and to keep your moral compass focused. And always remember that in the big picture, when you step back far enough, things are not that bleak. We're getting better and better all the time. We're living longer. By the way, we talk about business before. When I start these meetings with businessmen, the first thing I say is, business can't solve the problem. Business is the problem. And it is. And they hate to hear that, but then afterwards they kind of get there because the fact is it is. Business is the problem. And business has got to change. It will have to change. And we have to change. We can't keep having an endless, infinite number of different cars. It's ridiculous. If we want a sustainable future, we're all going to have to accept that, okay, I'll compromise and you know, on this, because it's going to help us to get there. There are all sorts of things that compromises we're going to have to make. The whole way that things are done, if it's going to be sustainable, is going to have to change. But business itself, business is at its core and in its essence is something which will have to change fundamentally. And so, you know, that's the key. We have to introduce this new paradigm. We have to be part of it. We have to be the change we want to see in the world. We have to focus on the principle that the means justify the end and not let ourselves get trapped into the thought, well, the end justifies the means. No, never accept an unfair means to achieve these ends. That's all that I do, and it helps me to stay focused, and I hope that's some advice for you, some help. It's not easy.